2 weeks ago, my mother stood on my front porch holding a worn carry-on suitcase and a neatly folded sheet of paper, stepping into my life for the first time in 9 years. That paper was not an apology, but rather a handwritten list of financial demands adding up to nearly $1 million. What she did not realize, as she waited for me to hand over our hard-earned security, was that I had spent those same 9 years maintaining a detailed record of every single time she had rejected, ignored, or erased my family. Hi, I'm Laura, and this is When Karma Calls. If you believe that genuine family is defined by loyalty and quiet support rather than a shared last name, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below letting me know where you are tuning in from today. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio, a small town of about 2,000 people where everyone knew everyone else's business, and life revolved around one main street, a single barber shop, and a diner that always smelled like freshly brewed coffee and fried bacon. My father, Arthur, worked the early shift at the local lumberyard for over 30 years, wearing the same heavy work boots every day and offering a quiet nod whenever he walked through the door at 5 in the evening. My mother, Patricia, ran our household and the church committee with strict precision, coordinating prayer chains, organizing holiday brunches, and deciding who brought which dish to every potluck without anyone ever questioning her authority. My younger sister, Megan, was 4 years behind me and possessed every trait I lacked, being outgoing, confident, and constantly surrounded by friends. In our home, love always felt like a carefully managed budget, and Megan was the priority line item that received funding first, while I was the quiet child who did her chores without asking, earned top marks in mathematics, and rarely made a fuss. When I turned 18, I received a full scholarship to Ohio State University, becoming the first person in our family to attend college. On the morning I left, my mother packed my bag and slipped a small card inside that said she hoped I would return home soon because I belonged there, which turned out to be the last affectionate thing she would ever write to me. I kept that card in my desk drawer for years, long after everything between us fell apart, serving as a reminder of the quiet baseline we used to share. During the spring semester of my junior year, I met David Vance in an advanced statistics lecture, where he sat 2 rows ahead of me and solved complex algorithms with a calm, deliberate ease that immediately caught my attention. David had grown up in Cleveland, raised entirely by his mother, Evelyn, a retired school librarian who worked long hours to give him every possible opportunity while still finding time to volunteer in her community. David was biracial, carrying his mother's warm eyes and his father's structured jawline, but what drew me to him most was the patient, intentional way he listened whenever someone spoke to him. Our first date was at a small taco truck near campus, where we sat on a bench sharing food and talking for hours about our goals, with David explaining his dream of building software that could solve real-world problems for small businesses. We dated through our final year of college and 2 years beyond, building a steady, quiet life together as we launched our respective careers in finance and engineering. David met my parents twice during that time, but both visits were strained and uncomfortable, filled with polite silences and awkward glances. The first time, my mother smiled too widely and repeatedly called him by the wrong name, while the second time, she barely looked at him when she spoke, and my father simply shook his hand and retreated into his usual silence. At Thanksgiving that year, my sister Megan pulled me aside in the hallway and whispered that while David seemed nice enough, our mother was never going to accept him, warning me that I needed to be realistic about our family's expectations. David proposed on a rainy Tuesday evening in our small apartment near campus, holding my hands across our kitchen table and asking if I would build a life alongside him, and I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. Later that night, I called home to share the news, but when my mother answered, the line went dead silent for several seconds after I told her. Instead of offering congratulations or asking about our plans, she told me in a flat voice that I needed to think carefully about what this decision meant for our family's standing, before passing the phone to my father, who simply cleared his throat twice and said nothing at all. 2 days later, Megan sent me a short text message asking if I was satisfied now that our mother had been crying nonstop since my call, though I chose not to reply because for the first time in my life, I felt truly happy about my future. A week after that, an envelope arrived in the mail containing a handwritten letter from my mother written on cream stationery. Across 4 structured paragraphs, She explained that if I went through with the marriage, I was choosing David over my own relatives, concluding with a harsh boundary stating that if I walked down that aisle, I should never expect to walk back through their front door because he was not one of us and never would be. Instead of throwing the letter away or reacting in anger, I folded the stationery neatly and placed it inside a clean manila folder in my desk, guided by the instinctual habit of a financial analyst who spent her days filing documents and preserving records. David and I were married on a crisp Saturday morning at the Multnomah County Courthouse in Oregon, surrounded by 12 close friends and David's mother, Evelyn, who flew in from Cleveland carrying a garment bag and a tin of fresh pound cake. Standing in the hallway before the ceremony, Evelyn pinned a simple flower to my lapel, took my hands in hers, and warmly welcomed me into her family with genuine affection. There was no long aisle or expensive flower arrangements, just a quick service before a judge who stumbled over our names, followed by a relaxed lunch at a local Thai restaurant where David's college roommate made toasts that had the whole table laughing. My dress was an off-white piece bought from a local shop for under $200, and David wore a tailored navy suit he had purchased on clearance, making us look like two practical people committing to their future on a modest budget. That evening, sitting in our quiet apartment, my hands trembled slightly as I looked at my small bouquet of grocery store roses, overwhelmed by the realization that the people who had raised me cared so little about my happiness that they chose to miss my wedding entirely. A week after the ceremony, I mailed a cheerful update card to my parents' home in Ohio, tucking inside a photo of David and me laughing on the courthouse steps, alongside a brief note expressing my hope that we could all find peace someday. 11 days later, the envelope returned to our mailbox, marked clearly across the front with a stark red stamp that read, "Return to sender." I looked at that red mark for a long time before taking out my manila folder, placing the unopened envelope inside, and labeling it as the second documented rejection, which officially marked the beginning of my record keeping. During our first year of marriage, I tried reaching out to my mother 4 separate times, leaving calm, measured voicemails explaining that David had taken an engineering position downtown, that I was preparing for my professional accounting exams, and that I missed her. None of those calls were ever returned, and every single holiday card or birthday message I sent back home returned to Oregon with the exact same red stamp stamped across my handwriting. The only direct communication from my father was a 4-word text message sent late one evening telling me that my mother simply needed time, offering no follow-up or further explanation. Around that same time, my sister posted a photo online showing my parents, herself, and her partner sharing a Sunday dinner together, captioned with a note about being surrounded by her whole world, a photo from an event to which I had never been invited. I printed a copy of that image and placed it alongside the returned mail, realizing that the manila folder was getting too thick, which prompted me to purchase a proper navy blue 3-ring binder with dividers and clear protective sleeves. I was not plotting any form of dramatic revenge, but rather following my natural inclination to keep accurate records, knowing that numbers and dates do not bend to emotional reinterpretation. By our second year in Portland, David decided to take a calculated risk by leaving his corporate job to develop a specialized compliance platform designed to streamline complex regulatory filings for small businesses that could not afford expensive legal teams. David set up a basic workspace in our cold garage using a simple whiteboard, a space heater, and 2 monitors, while I continued working my analyst job during the day to cover our living expenses before joining him at the desk every evening. Together, we spent endless hours refining financial frameworks, building pricing models, and verifying compliance modules against federal guidelines, until we officially launched the system 7 months later with 4 initial clients. In November of our 3rd year, our twins, Lucas and Hannah, arrived on a bright Wednesday morning, filling our small home with double the noise and joy. David cried as he held both infants by the hospital window, softly promising them that they would grow up knowing they were unconditionally loved every single day of their lives. Evelyn arrived the next morning to stay with us for 2 full weeks, cooking meals, folding laundry, rocking Lucas at 3 in the morning, and gifting the babies 2 hand-knit yellow blankets along with silver keepsakes engraved with their birth dates. Months prior, I had mailed ultrasound photos to my parents, followed by formal birth announcements after the twins arrived, but every single item was systematically returned unopened. Around that time, a high school acquaintance forwarded me a text message from my sister Megan, in which she callously claimed that my children did not have real grandparents because of the choices I had made. Sitting in the quiet nursery while Evelyn hummed softly in the kitchen washing baby bottles, I looked at my sleeping children and felt a steady sense of clarity, knowing they possessed a wonderful grandmother in Evelyn who never missed a milestone. I printed a copy of Megan's message, labeled it with the date in red ink, and placed it neatly into tab 3 of the binder. By our 4th year, the navy binder contained nearly 20 documented items sitting quietly in the bottom drawer of my desk behind standard tax files and home insurance papers. David asked me once why I kept adding to it, and I explained that if the twins ever grew old enough to ask why my side of the family was completely absent from their lives, I wanted to provide them with clear, documented facts rather than emotional theories. David understood completely, recognizing that clear documentation was simply an objective log of events that spoke for itself. Around that time, David's company expanded significantly, moving out of our garage and into a proper office space in the Pearl District with 11 full-time employees. David worked long hours refining the software architecture, while I managed the firm's balance sheets and financial strategy alongside my corporate job, ensuring we ate dinner together at 6:30 every evening without exception. The ongoing silence from Ohio had become a settled reality that rarely bothered me, while Evelyn visited every 6 weeks, teaching Lucas how to make grilled cheese sandwiches and helping Hannah identify the different birds visiting our backyard feeder. During our 5th year, David's company reached 15 employees, and we purchased our first home, a classic craftsman house in the Selwood neighborhood of Portland, featuring original hardwood floors and a massive plum tree in the yard that the twins instantly turned into their favorite play area. Signing those mortgage documents felt like a quiet triumph because we had built everything through our own hard work without receiving a single handout from anyone. One evening, I noticed an online update showing my mother sitting at a large dining table alongside Megan, her husband, and their newborn son, accompanied by a caption describing them as her complete world. Looking at the photograph of a family that explicitly excluded my husband, my children, and myself, I realized that I felt no inclination to cry, recognizing that the deep emotional hurt from my early 20s had long since faded into complete detachment. When Megan got married during our 6th year, I only learned about it after the fact through mutual acquaintances who shared photos of the event. The ceremony took place in the same white church where I had been baptized as a child, featuring 200 guests, an elaborate reception, and my mother dressed in lavender while my father wore a new dark suit. They made no attempt to invite me or share the news, yet I found myself looking at those photos with a surprising sense of calm, knowing that my own 12-person wedding with Thai takeaway and a modest dress had brought me a deep, lasting partnership with a wonderful man. I decided to order a set of monogrammed linen napkins as a wedding gift for Megan, sending them to her home along with a polite card wishing her and her husband every happiness. 3 weeks later, the box returned to my doorstep, completely unopened with the factory tape untouched, prompting me to document the returned gift, slide it into the binder, and return to the living room where Hannah was singing in the bath and Lucas was playing with his father. Everything shifted dramatically during our 7th year when Compliance Corps secured $12 million in growth funding from a major venture firm, valuing the business at $68 million. David and I still retained a significant portion of equity, prompting me to officially resign from my corporate position to serve as the company's full-time chief financial officer, placing my name on the executive filings alongside his. We relocated to a comfortable 4-bedroom house in Lake Oswego with excellent local schools and a broad kitchen island where the children could complete their homework while I reviewed quarterly financial reports. The investment news received brief coverage in regional financial publications, which apparently reached my hometown, as a friend from Ohio sent me a message stating that my mother had been asking about the venture funding at church, trying to understand what the valuation numbers actually meant. I read that message 3 times, realizing that after 7 years of complete silence, my mother was suddenly paying close attention because the financial math surrounding my life had fundamentally changed. Later that autumn, I decided to send one final birthday card home, including a sweet photograph of Lucas and Hannah at their school fall festival, wearing matching flannels with bright smiles. On the back of the print, I wrote a brief note mentioning that the children occasionally asked about her, and that I simply told them she lived far away. When the envelope returned 9 days later, I immediately noticed that the paper flap had been carefully sliced open and resealed with a thin strip of clear adhesive tape. Holding it up to the light, I realized that someone in that house, almost certainly my father, had opened the card, looked at his grandchildren's faces, and held the photograph, before my mother forced him to tape the envelope closed and send it back. I documented the tampered envelope in the binder with a calm, steady hand, recognizing that while my father had enforced the silence over the years, my mother was the primary architect who refused to let any connection exist if she could not control it. By our 8th year, the company had grown to over 80 employees across 2 locations, earning a spot on a major national list of top software firms to watch. I began noticing anonymous profile views originating from Millfield, Ohio on my professional networks, followed by another message from my friend, in town, mentioning that my mother was suddenly claiming to acquaintances that she had always known David was extraordinarily talented. Shortly after David appeared on a prominent technology podcast, my friend Rachel called me directly to report an unexpected incident regarding a family group chat. Rachel explained that Megan had accidentally added her to a private group conversation involving my family, leaving her included for 3 full days before anyone realized the mistake and removed her. Rachel had taken several screenshots of their conversation and sent them over, revealing 3 days of calculating discussion between my sister, mother, and father. In those messages, Megan pointed out our company's high valuation, calculating that an eventual public offering could yield massive wealth, and advised my mother to construct an itemized list of financial requests layered as family investments. My mother had responded by asserting that because I possessed far more resources than anyone in our hometown, I could easily afford to support my relatives, while my father quietly questioned the ethics of the plan before falling silent. Sitting in my car outside my son's soccer practice, I looked at those screenshots with absolute clarity, realizing that 9 years of strict rejection and returned cards were suddenly being swept aside simply because our financial status had shifted. I printed the messages, added them to the Navy binder under tab 26, and brought the matter to David's attention that evening after the children were asleep. David read the messages carefully, set the phone down, and asked how I wanted to proceed, reassuring me that he supported whatever boundary I chose to set. The following week, I met with a trusted estate attorney named Victoria to review our asset structures and ensure that all financial trusts established for Lucas and Hannah were completely secure against any potential third-party claims. Victoria confirmed that our legal protections were airtight, reminding me that 9 years of clear, documented estrangement made any external attempt to demand financial support legally impossible. 2 months prior to our planned public offering, my sister Megan texted me for the first time in nearly a decade, sending a simple 6-word message asking how I was doing and inquiring about the kids, as if no time had passed at all. I deliberately waited a week before responding, after which Megan proposed meeting up during an upcoming trip she had planned to Portland. We agreed to meet at a bright cafe in the Pearl District, where Megan arrived wearing a polished blazer and offered an overly long embrace before launching into a rapid series of 32 specific questions regarding the size of our house, our children's schooling, our company's revenue, and our personal assets. Halfway through our conversation, I noticed Megan angling her phone toward the window to take a photo of my electric vehicle parked outside, revealing that her visit was purely an intelligence-gathering mission to evaluate our wealth. I answered her inquiries with polite, general statements, and after we parted ways, I drove straight home, logged the encounter as item 28 in the Navy binder, and focused on finalizing our company's upcoming milestone. Compliance Corp officially went public on a Wednesday morning in October, and David and I stood together on the floor of the NASDAQ exchange in New York as our company stock opened strong, bringing our firm's total market value to over $400 million. Watching the figures update on the overhead screens felt surreal, representing years of late nights in a freezing garage and tireless financial modeling finally yielding tangible success. That evening, after celebrating quietly with David in our hotel room, I noticed several missed calls on my phone originating from my hometown area code, including messages left by both of my parents. The following morning, I listened to a voicemail from my father, his voice sounding thinner and noticeably older than I remembered as he expressed how proud he was after seeing us on the news, before explaining that my mother wanted to talk about our family's future. I saved the audio recording, feeling a brief wave of grief for the years we had lost, but recognizing that his sudden pride was entirely tied to a public financial milestone rather than a genuine desire to reconcile. 2 days after returning home to Oregon, a lengthy, carefully worded text message arrived from my mother, proposing that we put aside our past differences to discuss what it meant to be a family and share our future prosperity. The message contained 63 polished words, yet lacked a single mention of an apology or any acknowledgement of the 9 years she had spent returning my children's photos and enforcing our separation. I printed the text, placed it into the binder as item 29, and returned to my desk, looking at a framed photograph of David, the twins, and myself smiling together on the beach, knowing that my real family was already complete. At 10 o'clock on a cool Tuesday morning, a local taxi pulled up to our driveway, and I watched through the kitchen window as my mother stepped out onto the curb wearing her familiar cardigan and pearl earrings, carrying a small carry-on bag. She stood on our walkway for a moment, evaluating our home's architecture and manicured garden beds before stepping up to the porch and ringing the doorbell. When I opened the door, we stood 3 feet apart in silence until she looked at me with damp eyes and stated that she had come to discuss the children's future, offering no greeting, no expression of regret, and no warm words. I stepped aside and invited her inside, leading her directly to our broad kitchen table where light streamed across the room, illuminating framed photos of Evelyn with the twins alongside the kids' artwork pinned to the refrigerator. My mother sat down, placed her bag on the floor, and unfolded a sheet of paper covered in her familiar cursive writing, which featured 5 bulleted financial requests total $925,000. She read the demands aloud, detailing $500,000 for a retirement fund, $200,000 for Megan's son's education, funds for medical procedures, and a complete mortgage payoff for their home in Ohio. She then set the paper on the table, met my gaze, and firmly stated that this was what families owed to one another after everything my parents had provided during my upbringing. I looked at the itemized list, folded it neatly, and walked down the hallway to my home office. I pulled the heavy navy blue binder from the bottom drawer of my desk, carried it back into the kitchen, and set it down directly beside her folded sheet of demands. When my mother asked what the heavy folder was, I sat down, placed my hands flat on the table, and calmly explained that while she had brought a list of her financial demands, I had brought an accurate record of her actions over the past 9 years. I opened the binder to the very first tab, pulling out the original returned birthday card marked with the red stamp, and placed it on the table between us. I then systematically turned through the pages, laying out every returned holiday greeting, every unanswered call log, every forwarded message, and the tampered envelope containing the twins' festival photo. Reading each documented date aloud in a steady, measured voice without rising in anger or shedding a tear. My mother's expression shifted from defensive annoyance to sudden distress as a row of red-stamped envelopes accumulated across the table, covering nearly a decade of deliberate rejections. When I reached the screenshot of her group chat strategy detailing how to ask for money, her posture stiffened, and she angrily claimed that I had no right to hold onto those private conversations. I looked at her with complete calm and replied that she had no right to erase my children from her life for 9 years only to reappear when our financial circumstances changed. I picked up her handwritten demand sheet in one hand and pointed to the binder with the other, explaining that while her paper represented an unearned financial invoice, my binder represented 29 documented choices she had made to turn her back on my family. I told her plainly that she had not traveled to Oregon out of love or regret, but simply because the numbers surrounding my life had grown large enough to interest her. At that moment, the door from the garage rumbled open, and David walked into the kitchen carrying his work bag. He took in the scene quietly, walked over to my chair, and set a comforting hand on my shoulder before sitting down beside me in solid, unspoken support. My mother looked at David, the man she had dismissed for nearly a decade, wearing simple casual clothes and offering no grand gestures, yet standing completely united with his wife. I spoke quietly, telling my mother that I would not be giving her any money, because doing so would allow her to pretend that 9 years of cold abandonment were merely a minor misunderstanding that could be erased with a check. I added that if she ever genuinely wanted to know her grandchildren as human beings rather than line items on a financial ledger, that process would have to begin with a sincere, humble apology to them whenever she was truly ready to mean it. My mother sat in silence for a long moment, looking at the evidence laid out across our table, before quietly picking up her paper, gathering her suitcase, and walking out the front door, which clicked shut softly behind her. 2 weeks later, my father called me directly on a Tuesday morning while I was at my office desk. His voice cracked as he admitted that he should have picked up the phone and stood by my side years ago when the twins were born, asking if there was any way he could slowly earn the chance to know his grandchildren without money ever being involved. I told him that while trust takes time to rebuild, we could start slowly with short phone calls every 2 weeks, an arrangement he humbly accepted with deep gratitude. 9 years of silence taught me that true family is not defined by bloodlines, social standing, or sudden wealth, but by the loyal people who show up when your world is small, support your dreams when you have nothing, and love your children unconditionally. Thank you for listening to my story today. If this narrative reminded you that your true worth is never defined by a dollar amount or the approval of those who turned their backs on you, please share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next story.